I recently wrote a book. Sorry, I'm not here to plug the book, but I do want to refer to it because a lot of the ideas I want to talk about are in it. So I wrote this book called Soul Boom. And thanks. Why we need a spiritual revolution. And I want to address some of that in the context of what we're talking about this intersection between spirituality and capitalism and commerce, economic justice, these kind of issues. So the number one question I ask in the book is, why the hell is the guy who played Dwight on The Office writing a book about spirituality? Now, for those of you in the know, and wink, wink, there's a lot of Baha'is here, hint, hint, in case you hadn't figured that out yet. I grew up a member of the Baha'i faith, so if you know anything about the Baha'i faith, you know that we are inclusive of all the world's religions and beliefs. My dad would invite the born-again Christians that were knocking on the door on Sunday morning in and cook them pancakes and talk about the Bible. We would read from the Bhagavad Gita. We had Buddhist books and Sikh books on our bookshelves, and having deep, meaningful, enlivened conversations about big, deep spiritual truths like God and the soul and the meaning of life was a part of our weekly, our monthly family festivities. So that's part of why I wrote this book. The other reason I wrote this book, part two, which I talk about a little bit in here, is mental health issues that I suffered in my 20s. After I left the Baha'i faith, I went through a period of time living in New York trying to be an actor where I deeply, deeply struggled with anxiety and depression, with loneliness, with alienation. And this was a many, many year journey. And at that time in the 90s, there was no such thing as mental health. That wasn't something that was ever spoken about. You just kind of sucked it up and toughed it out. That's what happened in the 90s. And, you would get no one talked about therapy. It was something so expensive, it was completely out of my reach. The only person that was doing therapy in the 90s was Woody Allen, and look how that worked out for him. So in this deep struggle, I did the only thing I knew to do, which was to investigate a possible spiritual solution to some of the pain that I was feeling, to some of the discomfort and alienation and very dark thoughts. So I went back to those books. I went back to the Buddhist books and the Sikh books and the Quran, and I read the Bible. And fortunately, I also went back to the books of the Baha'i faith that I grew up in that I no longer wanted to read through the lens of my parents' way of seeing the world, but through my own lens, through my own journey. I also read many books from the Native American perspective on spirituality, and a lot of these things, long story short, opened up my eyes to the idea that I talk about a lot, and I reference in this book, from Father Teilhard de Chardin, who says it so brilliantly and eloquently: we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that quote for me kind of frames everything that I do and the work that I do. This knowledge that I am a spiritual being. I'm having a human experience, hopefully for 80 or 90 years. We'll see how long that lasts. And then my spiritual journey will continue onwards. But the third reason, and what I wanted to discuss with you here today, is the world is hurting. And the world needs spiritual messages of healing that can unite us, and can be a salve, a balm to young people. There wasn't just the COVID epidemic that happened when I was writing this book. There are countless pandemics that are currently going on in the world. We've heard a lot about economic injustice, prejudice, racism, climate change in a way you could view as a pandemic, but it's very related to our consumerist kind of culture and our nature. There are a plethora of pandemics that are eating away at us. And in a way, we don't know how bad we're suffering. We're like the frog in the boiling water. It's simmering right now. We don't know how hot the water is. We're like a fish that doesn't know that it's wet. So I summed this up by thinking about two television shows that helped raise me in the 70s. I was kind of raised by a color RCA television without a remote control throughout the 70s. And two of my favorite shows in the 70s were Kung Fu and Star Trek. So I hear some cheers for Star Trek. That's great. Thanks so much. Not so many for Kung Fu. If you get a chance to check out Kung Fu, it's really amazing. It's one of the most spiritually revolutionary television shows ever created. So there's a backstory of a horrible racism behind it, which is that Bruce Lee created the idea for Kung Fu, had the idea stolen from him, and then cast a white guy as the Chinese guy lead. So that's a whole other story. But putting that aside and just looking at the show itself, it's pretty revelatory. So Kwai Chang Caine grew up in a Shaolin monastery, and he learned martial arts, but he also learned great Taoist wisdom, Eastern wisdom, Buddhist and Confucian philosophy. And he was kicked out of the monastery, and he goes to the Old West in America because he's looking for his brother. And every episode, he's beset by obstacles. He's struggling. There are racist cowboys and corrupt sheriffs and innocent families in a pickle, and he uses his Eastern beautiful wisdom and occasionally his ass-kicking kung fu skills to help make the world a better place. So this I view as part of our spiritual journey. Kung Fu is a mirror for our personal journey as we go through the world. We are beset by tests. We are beset by our own version of corrupt sheriffs and racist cops, injustices everywhere. And we rely on our training and use and expression of our personal wisdom to overcome these tests. So this personal path that we walk, this Kung Fu path, we all walk as we go to Starbucks, as we go to Trader Joe's, as we go to our jobs and we deal with our families over Thanksgiving. This is one of our spiritual paths. Star Trek to me is the other great spiritual path, because Star Trek, although Gene Roddenberry, the creator, was an avowed atheist, it really is about the spiritual journey of humanity. Star Trek, if you don't know the backstory to Star Trek, I'm sure you know that there's lasers and starships and they're flying around and they have beautiful form-fitting outfits. But the backstory is that there was a terrible conflagration. There was a World War III on planet Earth, and a huge percentage of the population died. And out of that, those flames of suffering, humanity came together and solved all of its issues. It solved racism. It solved sexism. It solved income inequality. It became harmonious with nature. So what is humanity as a species then able to do? It's able to boldly go where no man has gone before to seek out new life and new civilizations and have a grand old time and rise to the purpose for which it was created in Roddenberry's eyes. So the reason that it was able to solve income inequality, and this is really, it's a fun thing to study. There's whole books on it. It's called Trekonomics. Look it up. It's fabulous. I love the study of Trekonomics. It's how an economy works, where you have a technology called a replicator where you can program anything into it. You know, I want a ham sandwich, or I want a new TV remote control, or I'd like a new pair of, Allbirds shoes or whatever, and go beep, 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 beep. And the replicator creates this, anything you want. So what does that do? It removes scarcity from the world. All of a sudden, there's no scarcity, there's no abundance. So I talked about this third reason why I wrote the book and all of these different pandemics. When you look at the systems, I don't have the time to get into this right now, but when you look at the systems that are broken right now in the world, especially the Western world, it's legion. There's not a single system that's really working. And you could talk to anyone who works in agriculture or dentistry or education or healthcare or transit system, the arts, which I work in, that's the worst. You talk to anyone and you can see that systems are corrosively broken and operating under the very worst of human impulses. And one of those systems is the economic system and our current system of capitalism. So, and don't worry, I'm not going to say that we need to go to socialism, but we do need to examine what is profoundly broken, because what humanity is doing to these broken systems is continuously slapping Band-Aids on top of them, right? We thought we fixed racism by passing a bunch of laws and electing Obama, and everyone was like, yay, we're all done with racism. Well, no, the laws are crucial and important, and Obama was a good leader, but that has nothing to do with the underlying disease that's affecting this particular pandemic. And the same thing works in terms of commerce and capitalism. So I don't have time to read from it, but one of the examples I write about in the book is cryptocurrencies. I remember being an early admirer of crypto and talking to a lot of young people about crypto, and they thought it was going to be revolutionary. Sam Bankman-Fried. They thought it was going to transform world economies, that the people of Ghana and the Congo could have crypto on their phones and there wouldn't be banks and there wouldn't be nations telling us, sending down what our interest rates are, et cetera, et cetera. And all new doors were going to open. It was going to democratize money. Well, look what happened. I mean, it's not over yet. There still may be some benefits to crypto, but all we see is the same greed and corruption infesting crypto as any other system, because we haven't addressed the underlying issue, which is a spiritual one. Another aspect of capitalism is, one of my favorite quotes about it is John D. Rockefeller, who, when asked by a reporter how much money is enough, responded, "Just a little more." David Lee Roth of Van Halen, crickets, I'm getting crickets, said, "Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy a yacht that sails right next to it." But I wanted to bring up a couple of examples before I wind up. There was a wonderful book called Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. When I grew up, I learned about trees, and it was survival of the fittest. The tallest tree survives. The tallest tree has the deepest roots and gets the most sunlight, and there's a battle in the forest. This is how I was taught. This is how we were all educated in the United States in the 70s and 80s. Well, funny thing, when botanists and tree scientists and tree huggers started really studying how a forest works, we see now that it is a cooperative system. The tallest tree actually shares the energy and the chlorophyll with the shorter trees. They're bound by the root systems and by the funguses that connect them, and that it is a living, breathing organism in totality. This is very similar to a new way of thinking about humanity itself. I want to just read a couple of book titles. I haven't read these books, but I know all about these books. I'm just so busy, But there's a whole new wave of sociology that's exploring the idea that is transforming that same mythology that we had about trees, about humanity. Because when I was growing up again in the 70s and 80s, when I was learning history, it was all about the strongest tribes survive. It's dog eat dog world. It's backstabbing. It's every man for himself. And it is humanity's story is a story of violence and subjugation, and the strongest, most quote unquote most successful cultures win and the other ones lose. This kind of like evolutionary history. But there's a new way of seeing human history that looks at the idea of humans being cooperative in their cultures. There's a book called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. There's a new book that just came out called Survival of the Friendliest. There's another one, The Social Instinct, How Cooperation Shaped the World by Nicola Raihani. One of my favorites is by Charles, which I actually have read, is by Charles Eisenstein, which I highly recommend, called Sacred Economics. It's a beautiful book. And he talks again about the fact that there was, throughout human history, a gift economy, and how we can return to this idea of a gift economy. It's not a trade-off. It's not, I'll give you 27 pomegranates for one, toaster oven. This is about simply one group of people that has plenty, sharing it with those that don't. Yassine was talking about that last night as part of the African tradition, where you do not let people go hungry, and whatever you have, you share. This can be part of a reconceptualizing of economic structures through bringing the sacred into economics. Another way, Charles Eisenstein says, and you should read all his books, by the way, he's brilliant. Another way to see the unexpected fruits that arise from the mystery is that when we live in the spirit of the gift, magic happens. Gift mentality is a kind of faith, a kind of surrender, and that is a prerequisite for miracles to arise. Ultimately, what economics attempts to measure underneath money is the totality of all that human beings make and do for each other. So at the end of the book, I talk about 7 pillars for a spiritual revolution. And one of them that I'm kind of underlining here, and this is just a superficial examination of this idea, is re-examining this old mythology of humans, that we are individualistic, that we stab each other in the back, that don't tread on me, every man for himself, that this is the people of one valley didn't like the people of the other valley because they had different hair or wore different shoes, and the strongest of the two valleys would win, and they would subjugate the other. Now, of course, there was a great deal of subjugation and pain and violence that's happened throughout human history, but we also need to examine that other mythology of human beings, the mythology of cooperation, that we have helped each other, that we can be kind, that we can turn to our higher nature, that we can share, that we can give, that we can go back to this idea of a gift economy. And again, if we are spiritual beings having a human experience, if that's reality, and if you believe that that's reality, well, then that should govern every single decision that we make. And in every system that anyone here happens to work in, we are all spiritual beings having a human experience, and that calls for tremendous, tremendous compassion. And guess what? Compassion is there in human history if you look for it. My son was taking AP European history, and all he had to do was memorize all the wars and who won all the wars. It was ridiculous. It was pages and pages of memorization of what Prussian general won some stupid battle in 1827 in Poland. It was a ridiculous way to learn about and understand history. And I'll leave you with one last story. I was a young actor struggling in New York in the theater, and I worked with this amazing acting teacher named Andre Gregory, and he's the subject of the film My Dinner with Andre, which you should all see. Thank you, the one fan. And he would meet with his acting students, and he would say, I met with him over tea, and he asked me how it was going, and I was like, Andre, I'm struggling, life is hard, the world is so dark, I don't know what to do, I feel overwhelmed, and I just feel like it's all a crock of shit. He was a very, very old man in the 90s. He's still alive. He's like 127. I don't understand it. He's having quite a human experience. He reached out across the table, and I will never forget this moment. It's one of the most powerful in my entire life. He reached out across the table, grabbed my arm hard, and he looked me in the eye and he said, Don't do it. Don't be cynical. Don't be pessimistic. If you're cynical, they win. If you're pessimistic, they win. You have to spread joy. You have to spread hope. You have to believe that change is possible, and otherwise you'll just sit on your couch and they will win. So one of the pillars of our spiritual revolution, which we can also apply to spiritual economics to sacred economics to a reinterpretation, a reimagining, a reinvigorating of capitalism and the system. And we've heard a lot of amazing ideas over the last couple of days, is we have to squash cynicism and keep hope alive. Thanks so much.
Think of sharing what you know.